It is located between the lots of the nerves here, lots of the nuclei here, and making connection with the lower part to the upper part. So it receives the information and sending the information to other parts, and also then again receiving the information. So the main function of the reticular formation is connecting different parts together. If we want to see the general arrangement of the reticular formation, you can see the three longitudinal columns. One of them, the red color, is the median column, which is located at the midline. The next one, medial column, and the next one is lateral. The lateral is in a black color, the medial is the blue color, and the red one is median column. We start from the median, from the red color. We called it median column. It is consisting intermediate size neurons. So the red color is intermediate in size. The second one here, large neurons. And the next one, the black color, is small neurons. The first one, the red color, involving in regulating the mood, pain, awakeness, and also the sleep. By means of what? By means of connecting to upper part and to lower part. What about the next part? I told you it has large neuron. The main function of this part is sending the information, sending the output to a spinal cord. For what? I told you we have the descending tract, also we have the descending information which comes from the upper part and goes to spinal cord for regulating the muscles, regulating the movement of the muscles. And also, what about the third one, the lateral column? It is related for receiving the information and also processing the sensory information. So by means of the third one, receiving the information, by means of the first one, connecting to several parts, and by means of the middle one, sending the information to the spinal cord. So if we have a damage in these three parts, the wakefulness is, we have the lack of the wakefulness, and it is leads to coma situation. You can see another picture. We have the first column, the second one, and the third one. By means of connecting, it is involving in awakeness, in mood, in pain. And also I wrote it for you, the function. I told you the control of skeletal muscle by means of sending the information to spinal cord. Controlling of autonomic nervous system by means of receiving the information from higher part or the upper part and sending to lower part, sending to parasympathetic part of the spinal cord or sympathetic part of the spinal cord. And also reticular activating system. Tell me, you said true, by means of damaging the reticular formation, we have coma situation. Tell me, if the reticular formation working very well, we have the lots of wakefulness. What happened if the reticular formation working a little, the amount of the working of the reticular formation is being decreased? It is related to what? Tell me. In some situation, we have the lack of awakeness. In some situation, we have, for example, a little awakeness, and also in the opposite side, we have lots of awakeness. No, lack of moving. No, I'm asking. That's true. It is related to the moving, but I'm telling about the awakeness. What happens if you have a less awakeness? Yes. What does it mean we have low awareness? In which times of the day? For example, yes, that's true. That's true, Mrs. Gandur. At the night, when you want to go to sleep, at the sleep situation, the amount of the reticular formation, the function of the reticular formation is being low. Okay, so the lack leads to coma. A small amount of function goes to sleep, and lots of, for example, awareness is meaning that, for example, at the day we are working. When we are working, we have lots of awareness. And when we go to sleep, we have the less amount of awareness. This is the function and relation and the definition for the reticular formation. Another part that I want to say to you is the arterial supply. If you remember, I told you all of the structures in our body needs to arterial supply, needs to oxygenated blood. And after that, we must drain the oxygenated blood into the heart. Okay. Same as before, I told you about the blood supply of the spinal cord and medulla oblongata. At this slide, I want to say about the arterial supply of the brain. Look at the picture. If you remember, I told you we have the foramen transversum at the cervical part of the vertebral column. Okay, we have the vertebral artery, which arises from the subclavian artery. It comes and passes from the foramen transversum and comes to cranium. If you remember, I told you they are coming together and making one artery. We called it basilar artery, which is located at the anterior surface of the pons. Before they are coming together and making one single artery, they send several branches. For example, anterior spinal artery, posterior spinal artery. And also, if you remember about the blood supply of the cerebellum, I told you the cerebellum getting the blood from posterior inferior side, anterior inferior side, and also from the superior part. The posterior inferior cerebellar artery arises from vertebral artery, you are seeing. After that, the vertebral artery from one side and another side coming together and making basilar artery. And after that, the basilar artery sending the branches, for example, pontine arteries, supplying the blood for pons. And also we have anterior inferior cerebellar artery, which arises from basilar artery. So if I ask you at the exam, which of the arteries originated from vertebral, and the choices are posterior inferior, anterior inferior, superior cerebellar artery, or for example, pontine arteries, you must check posterior inferior cerebellar artery arises from vertebral artery. So we continue. The basilar artery sending the arteries to the cerebellum, anterior inferior. And at the end, it's sending the branches as the superior cerebellar artery. It means that it is supplying the blood from the superior part. And what is the termination of the basilar artery? We have one branches, we call it this part, posterior cerebral artery. So the posterior cerebral artery is the termination of the basilar artery. This part I'm showing to you. Stick it in your mind from this part. And then I want to say this part. I ask you something. What are the branches of the aortic arch? Tell me about the branches of aortic arch. Tell me. I'm seeing your answers. That's true, Sohrab. Brachiocephalic trunk in the right side, left common carotid, and also left subclavian. That's true. Yes, that's true, Fatima Sando. That's true. So, as you are seeing the answers of your friends, we have brachiocephalic in right side, and also the common carotid and subclavian arises from the left side. Okay, the common carotid, I want to say about this part, common carotid. The common carotid passing from the neck, okay, and in the carotid sheath, it divides into two branches. One of them, we called it external carotid arteries, and another one is internal carotid artery. Tell me, what is the function of external carotid artery? Supplying the blood for what? For which location? What is the function of external carotid artery? That's true, sort of face. Another part. Yes, yes, I said true. Hassan Sardam said true. All of the blood supply, which is related to, yes, Lavia, that's true. All of the structures in the neck and also in the face is related to external carotid artery. So, no, Vad Zahra, it's not true. The brain is not true. I want to say at this time. The blood supply for the brain is related to internal carotid artery. So the external carotid artery related to the face and the neck, and the internal carotid artery is related to supplying the blood for brain. Okay, and the internal carotid artery doesn't have any branches in the neck. Okay, do you understand? We must say about the internal carotid artery, which is related to brain. So look at this picture. The internal carotid artery passes from the neck and comes into cranium. It divides to two branches, two main branches: anterior cerebral artery, this part, and middle cerebral artery, this part. Okay, middle cerebral artery and anterior cerebral artery. These two branches, in one side, these and this one, and in another side, this part and this part. These are the branches of internal carotid artery. So by means of these two arteries, anterior cerebral and middle cerebral, and also in posterior part, we have posterior cerebral, which arises from the basilar artery. We have one circle. You are seeing this circle. We called it circle of Willis. Okay, circle of Willis. By means of this circle, the blood supply for brain is performed. Okay, by means of circle of Willis. And also they must have connection to each other because it comes from the internal carotid and this part is from basilar artery. So we have one communicating artery, posterior communicating artery, which connects this part to this part. These are from two different origination, internal carotid and this part, basilar artery. They are connecting to each other. And also, I told you before, when we have posterior something, we must have anterior something. We have anterior communicating artery here, connecting the anterior cerebral artery of one side to anterior cerebral artery of another side. They are coming together, they are connecting to each other and making this circle of Willis. This is the source for blood supply for the brain. So look at the picture. This part, this view, is the supralateral surface of the brain, and this part is medial surface of the brain. Look at here. This part is the occipital lobe. Okay, and also here we have the occipital lobe again. Okay, the occipital lobe in the medial surface and also in the supralateral surface getting the blood from posterior cerebral artery. It means that from this part. The occipital lobe, it's not different. Medial surface or supralateral surface, both of them. All the parts of the occipital lobe getting the blood from posterior cerebral artery, this part. Look at this view again. So you are seeing we are started from the supralateral surface. All of the parts of the supralateral surface of the brain getting the blood from middle cerebral artery, sending the blood to all of the parts of supralateral surface of the brain, except three locations. One of them was occipital lobe. Another part, this part, inferior temporal gyrus. If you remember, in the temporal lobe of the brain, we have superior temporal sulcus and inferior temporal sulcus. It is dividing the temporal into three parts: superior temporal gyrus, middle temporal gyrus, and inferior temporal gyrus. The inferior temporal gyrus getting the blood from posterior cerebral artery. You are seeing at the different color. So the occipital and inferior temporal gyrus, getting the blood from posterior cerebral artery. I told you we have 3 exceptions. One here, the second one here, and what about the third one you are seeing here? The upper margin of the supralateral surface getting the blood from anterior cerebral artery, this part. Anterior cerebral artery. Then we go to medial surface. Look at here. The medial surface getting the blood from 2 origination. One of them, all of the parts of the medial surface getting the blood from anterior cerebral artery here. Anterior cerebral artery. And also you are seeing the anterior cerebral artery sending the branch which goes to supralateral. They are here. These are from anterior cerebral artery, which is started from here in the medial surface and then sending the blood into supralateral surface. You can see here. And also I told you the medial surface of the brain getting the blood from anterior cerebral artery, except just one here, the occipital lobe. I told you the occipital lobe, it doesn't have any differences in the supralateral surface and also in the medial surface. The occipital lobe getting the blood from posterior cerebral artery. Okay? You understand? Any question? If you have question, ask. Okay? Thank you. So you must know about that. It is important for your exam. It is important for your exam. In the supralateral surface, all of the locations getting the blood from middle cerebral artery except 3 locations. These parts, the upper margin, which getting the blood from anterior cerebral artery, the occipital lobe, and inferior temporal gyrus, which getting the blood from posterior cerebral artery. And in the medial surface, all of the parts getting the blood from anterior cerebral artery except this part, posterior cerebral artery. And also they have a specific, for example, specific the names. If it goes to, for example, parietal lobe, we call it parietal branch. It goes to frontal lobe, we call it frontal branch. If it goes to, for example, this sulcus in the occipital, we call it calcarine sulcus. We call it calcarine branch. Okay, these are not important. Based on the location, for example, they send the branch. Calcarine branch, callosal branch, frontal branch, parietal branch. And also they have a specific names in some location which is not important for you. I pass. Same as the other locations, for example, kidney, maybe stomach, maybe liver. When it gets the oxygenated blood, after that it wants to send the oxygenated blood. How the draining the blood in the brain happen? Look at here. If you remember, I told you in the spinal cord we have the meninge layer, includes dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater from outer to inner side. But we have one difference in the meninge layer of the brain in comparison to spinal cord. In the brain, the dura mater layer includes 2 layers. Outer layer, we call it endosteal. It means that it is related to osteol. And the inside, we call it meningeal layer. Between these 2 layers of the dura mater, the outer layer and the inner layer, we have spaces between them. We call them sinus. You can see here. Dural venous sinus. We have several sinuses in the brain based on the location we name. For example, we have, let me show you. Look at here. We have, for example, superior sagittal sinus here. Inferior sagittal sinus. We have, for example, look at this part. It has the name, cavernous sinus. We have the petrosal sinus, which is related to the petros of the temporal. Based on the location, they have specific names. Okay, but one thing which is important, very important for you, is this part. Look at this part. this part. We call it confluence of sinus. It means that, for example, it is a lake and lots of river drain into this lake. Okay, you are seeing, for example, the occipital sinus drain into this part. Or for example, look at that, this part, the superior sagittal sinus drain. The inferior sagittal sinus and plus with Galen vein and making the straight sinus drain into confluence of sinus. I wrote it for you. Look at here. The confluence of sinus. So you must imagine that it is something like a lake and the river are draining into it. The confluence of sinus. What happened after that? After that, we have the transverse sinus. Okay, the transverse sinus arises from this part, from the confluence of sinus, and goes to both sides. After that, we have another sinus. We called it sigmoid sinus. It's something like S in English. Sigmoid sinus. So this part is the termination part of the sinus of the brain. After that, we have internal jugular vein and passing from the jugular foramen. By passing from the jugular foramen, the internal jugular vein appears and it passes from the neck in the carotid sheath, and after that it's combining with the subclavian vein and making the brachiocephalic vein in the right side and brachiocephalic vein in the left side. The two brachiocephalic veins coming together and making the superior vena cava, and after that the superior vena cava draining into heart. Okay, so you must know about the confluence of sinus, transverse sinus, sigmoid sinus, and after that we have internal jugular vein. I think you must remember that in the neck we have carotid sheath, we have common carotid artery, we have internal jugular vein, and between them we have the vagus nerve. These are the contents of the carotid sheath. After that, it's receiving the blood from the brain and draining into, at the end, draining to heart. Do you have questions about the venous drainage? Okay, we continue. I told you. Okay, we reach to this part, the tracts. I told you before, we are here to study neuroanatomy for what? For understanding the tracts. It means that we have sensory tract and motor tract, or ascending tract and descending tract. I'm asking one question. Tell me, for example, spino-olivary tract. It is ascending tract or descending tract? Spino-olivary. That's true, Razan. That's true, Ali, and also Isa. No. Isa, you told me this is descending. Why you are saying this one is descending? The descending tract is not true. It is ascending. How we can understand, for example, one tract is ascending or descending? By means of the names. I told you. Yes, I said that's true. Because it is started from the spinal cord. From the name, for example, spinothalamic, spino, for example, cerebellum, spino-olivary, spino-reticular. The first part is spine, spinal cord. The spinal cord is the inferior parts of the nervous system. We don't have anything inferior to spinal cord. So it means that it is started from the spinal cord and go to another location which is located at the superior parts of the spinal cord. So this is ascending. And tell me, the ascending tract containing sensory information or motor information? Ascending tract, concentrate. That's true. Yes, true. It is sensory because it is started from the spinal cord and carrying the sensory information into upper part. And after that, we have descending tract. The descending tract started from the cerebral cortex and sending the information to the spinal cord to go, for example, to making the spinal nerve. Okay, it carries the motor information. So this is the definition of the ascending tract and descending tract. We came back. And also we have two names, exteroceptive information and proprioceptive information. What is the differences between them? Exteroceptive information and proprioceptive information. What is the differences? That's true, Aya. Proprioceptive information is from the inside and the exteroceptive information from outside. That's true. Okay, you are seeing the exteroceptive information and proprioceptive information. The exteroceptive from the outside of the body and proprioceptive information from inside of the body. For example, from the joint, from the muscles, from the tendons. You are seeing the ascending tract of the spinal cord. I told you we have first order neuron, second order neuron, and the third order neuron. I told you before, the first order neuron is DRG, dorsal root ganglion, which sends the dendrites and getting the information from, for example, one part. It comes to DRG, and after that, the DRG sending the axons into spinal cord. So in the most of the tract, the second order neuron is located at the spinal cord. And after that, it goes and pass and ascends and go to third order neuron. The third order neuron is located at the thalamus, amplifying the sense in the thalamus, and after that sending the information, sending the sensory information into related parts of cerebral cortex. This is the main definition for the ascending tract. We have lots of ascending tracts you are seeing at the slides. We started and we talked about them. We talked about the importance of the ascending tracts. The first one, the name is lateral spinothalamic tract. From the name you must understand it is started from the spinal cord and it goes to thalamus. After the amplifying in the thalamus, it goes to cerebral cortex. Okay. If you are seeing that, I wrote it for you, lateral spinothalamic. It is based on the location. In the next slide, you can see anterior spinothalamic tract. It means that this tract is located anterior to previous one. So, the first order neuron here, it comes from the outside, it comes to DRG, then came to the spinal cord. So I have a question. Tell me, what is the differences between ipsilateral and contralateral? What is the differences? Yes, that's true. So Rob said true. Ipsilateral means, for example, passing from the same side. It doesn't want to go to another side. Or contralateral, it means that it goes to opposite side. Look at the picture. So tell me, you are seeing this tract. This is ipsilateral or contralateral? Look at the picture and tell me, this part is ipsilateral or contralateral? All of you are telling the false answer. Yes, Isa Ibrahim said true. This is contralateral. Look at here. Look at this part. Yes, Mustafa, that's true. It is contralateral. Look at here. The information are coming from the outside. It comes to spinal cord at this side and then goes to another side and then pass. If it was stayed at the one side and passing in at the same side, we called it ipsilateral. But because it comes to spinal cord, goes to another side, and then ascend, we called it contralateral. And we call this passing to another side, we called it cross. It comes from one side and have a cross and go to another side and then pass. So this part is contralateral. Uh, so it comes to spinal cord and passes and go to another side and then pass and go to thalamus for amplifying. Which part of thalamus? VPL nucleus of the thalamus. VPL nucleus of the thalamus, and after that by passing from internal capsule. Do you remember in the previous session I told you about the internal capsule? Is there anyone to tell me what was the internal capsule? What was the function or what is the matter of the internal capsule? Yes, that's true, Aya. It is white matter. What was the function? Yes, Sohrab, that's true, carrying this information. But what is the function, another function? No, cortex and spine. Yes, it was carrying the information. Yes, that's true. But if you remember, I told you by means of these capsules, internal capsule, external capsule, and the extreme capsule, mm, who sent this? Labia. Whoa, lots of information. You use ChatGPT? You are very fast to use the ChatGPT. No, I want that you think. Yes, oh yeah, that's true. It wants to separate which part from which part. It wants to separate the caudate nucleus, one of the basal ganglia, from the lentiform nucleus. I told you we have two parts, globus pallidus and also the putamen. It wants to separate the caudate nucleus from globus pallidus, not putamen. It wants to separate caudate from the globus pallidus. So you said true. It wants to separating. So it pass from the internal capsule, and after that, by means of something we call it corona radiata, it is the white matter and carrying the information to related parts of cerebral cortex. This is the lateral spinothalamic tract. What is the function of the lateral spinothalamic tract? Carrying the pain and temperature. Just pain and temperature. Understand this part is related to pain and temperature, which carries these two informations to spinal cord, have a cross, and then pass and go to VPL nucleus of the thalamus, and then go to cerebral cortex. You are seeing again from another view. It comes to DRG, comes to spinal cord. We have a cross here. It passes and go to thalamus, and then it passes and go to cerebral cortex. You are seeing. And also, this view is related to the thalamus. I told you by means of internal medullary lamina, we have this part Y-shaped, anterior nuclei, which is related to limbic system, lateral part, and medial parts. In the lateral part, we have VPL nucleus of thalamus, which is involving in lateral spinothalamic tract. The next one, anterior spinothalamic tract. All of the information are the same to lateral spinothalamic, except the kinds of information. This part, anterior spinothalamic tract, carries the light touch and also the pressure. So the light touch and pressure is related to anterior spinothalamic tract, and pain and temperature is related to lateral spinothalamic tract. And you are seeing the pathway. It comes, I go to next slide, this part. It comes to DRG, then it has crossed, then it goes to VPL nucleus of the thalamus, and then go to cerebral cortex. So the type of the information is different. One of them was related to pain and temperature, and another one is related to pressure and light touch. The next tract, fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus conatus. Tell me, some of you, tell me about, I told you before about the gracilis and conatus. Tell me what was the uh, gracilis and conatus. Don't use ChatGPT and think. What was gracilis and what was the conatus tract? Hossein Tarhini said that the gracilis is ascending fibers located in posterior funiculus. Yes, that's true. Well, it's related to which part? Which sensory information? From which part? Gracilis, yes, said that gracilis sensory information from T6. Sohrab, that's true. Upper and lower limb. But gracilis and conatus, which of them is related to lower limb and which of them is related to upper limb? No, Isa, that was opposite. Gracilis is related to lower limb and conatus is related to upper limb. Yes, Mustafa, I think Mustafa said true. Vad Zahra gracilis, yes, from lower limb. That's true. Sohrab said true. Yes, thank you. Okay, we came back. Gracilis and conatus, the information from the upper limb and lower limb. I told you before, but I repeat it again. Fasciculus gracilis. It is located at the all-length of the spinal cord. It is related to sacral, lumbar, and lower 6 thoracic spinal nerve because it is related to the lower limb. The information came to DRG or dorsal root ganglion. So the first order neuron is located at the DRG. Then it goes and passes to which part? To the medulla oblongata. In the medulla oblongata, we have gracile tubercle and connate tubercle. The information, this part, the green color, came from the lower limb and came to gracile tubercle, and the blue one came from the upper limb and came to connate tubercle. After that, they are making the internal arcuate fibers, and they pass at the midline and making sensory decussation. Decussation means cross. At this part, at the medulla oblongata, we have pyramidal decussation and also sensory decussation. The pyramidal decussation are the descending fibers, which is started from the cerebral cortex, and this part, the gracile and conatus, arises from the spinal cord. They are coming, making the sensory decussation, and after that, by means of medial lemniscus, I wrote it for you. By means of medial lemniscus, it pass and go to thalamus, again, VPL nucleus of the thalamus. And again, by means of internal capsule and corona radiata, goes to cerebral cortex. Okay, this is the pathway for fasciculus gracilis. You are seeing again in this part, it comes from the lower limb, comes to spinal cord, go to medulla oblongata, have a cross and making the internal arcuate fibers and medial lemniscus, go to VPL nucleus of the thalamus here, and then go to cerebral cortex. The next one, conatus, is the same, but the difference is the origination. It is related to the upper limb, and the gracilis is related to the lower limb. So it arises from the upper 6 thoracic and all of the cervical spinal nerve. It ascends ipsilaterally. They are all the same between gracilis and conatus. I told you, I pass. Again, this slide is repeated. Okay. I told you about the tract which is started from the lower part, from the spinal cord, and wants to go to cerebrum or to cerebral cortex. But we have several tracts which is started from the spinal cord, but they don't want to go to cerebral cortex. They want to go to cerebellum. Okay, we call it posterior spinocerebellar tract, anterior spinocerebellar tract, and coneocerebellar tract. We will discuss about them one by one. The first one, posterior spinocerebellar tract. Look at here. Look at here. I zoom. Okay. This part, I'm showing you the posterior spinocerebellar. This part. This is the posterior spinocerebellar. And this part is anterior spinocerebellar. Okay. Tell me, what is the differences between them? Tell me about the differences between posterior spinocerebellar and anterior spinocerebellar. Yes, Razan, that's true. Posterior is ipsilateral. It doesn't have any cross. But anterior spinocerebellar is contralateral. It has cross. Okay, look at the picture. The information, they are getting the information, for example, from the trunk and lower limb. It's the same. They are getting the information from the trunk and limbs. It comes to nucleus dorsalis. I told you before, I think I told you in the spinal cord, we have anterior horn and posterior horn. In the posterior horn, we have the Clark column or Clark nucleus, which is located at the C8 to L3. It's not important. It comes to the spinal cord. The posterior spinocerebellar comes to the spinal cord without any cross. Look at the arrow. It comes to spinal cord and ipsilaterally ascend. Ascend to which part? It comes to medulla oblongata. Okay, and after that it goes to cerebellum. Tell me how the information carries from the medulla oblongata to the cerebellum, or what is the connection between the medulla oblongata and cerebellum? What is the connection of the medulla oblongata and cerebellum? Yes, Sohrab, that's true. By means of peduncle. Yes, Nursa, that's true. Which peduncle? Medulla oblongata and cerebellum. Which peduncle? Yes, Razan said true. Inferior cerebellar peduncle. By means of inferior cerebellar peduncle connecting the medulla oblongata into cerebellum. So, at this part, in the posterior spinocerebellar tract, the information came, ipsilaterally ascends until reaching to medulla oblongata. After that, by means of inferior cerebellar peduncle, the information goes to cerebellum. We go to anterior spinocerebellar. Look at here, the information came to spinal cord, passing and go to another side, goes and ascends to midbrain. How the midbrain connecting to cerebellum? How the midbrain connecting to cerebellum? Yes, Sohrab said true. Yes, Razan, that's true. By means of superior cerebellar peduncle. By means of superior cerebellar peduncle connecting the midbrain into cerebellum. But it has another cross. Look at the picture. It comes to midbrain, then comes to cerebellum, and at the cerebellum, it has another cross. Look at here. Look at the arrow. Okay, so you must understand that in the anterior spinocerebellar tract, we have two cross. One cross at the spinal cord. It comes from, for example, right side. It goes to left side. It passes at the left side. It comes to cerebellum, and after that, at the cerebellum, because I told you in the cerebellum we have right cerebellar hemisphere and left cerebellar hemisphere. It comes from the left side and go to right side. So you understand that from this slide. In several tracts, we have cross. In several other tracts, we don't have cross. And also, in several tracts, we have two crosses. One of them, for example, in this part, in the anterior spinocerebellar, we have one cross at the spinal cord, and also we have another cross at the cerebellum. Do you understand? Any question? Thank you. Okay, this one was anterior spinocerebellar. And if you remember, I told you before, in the medulla oblongata, we have gracile tubercle and also the connate tubercle. And also we have an extra nucleus. We called it accessory connate nucleus. Look at here, accessory connate nucleus. I told you in previous minutes, gracilis and conatus. The gracilis and conatus receiving the information from the upper limb and lower limb and sending them to the cortex. But here we have an extra nucleus. We called it accessory connate nucleus. It means that the information came to the spinal cord and then goes to medulla oblongata, and after that they goes to this nucleus, accessory connate nucleus. What happened after that? They are making posterior external arcuate fibers and then sending the information or going the information into cerebellum. So this is the differences between coneo-cerebellar and coneatus, fasciculus coneatus. In the fasciculus coneatus, the information go to cerebrum or the cortex, and in the coneo-cerebellar tract, the information comes to accessory connate nucleus and then go to cerebellum. This is the differences between these two tracts. Another tract you are seeing, spinotectal tract. I told you before. Where is the tectum? Tell me. I told you. Where is the tectum? Yes, Saurabh, that's true. Hassan said true. I told you, in the midbrain, we have something, we called it cerebral aqueduct. By means of the cerebral aqueduct, we divide the midbrain into anterior parts and posterior parts. We call the posterior parts of the midbrain as tectum. In the tectum, we have superior colliculus and inferior colliculus. The superior colliculus was related to vision, and the inferior colliculus was related to hearing. So, this tract is spinotectal tract. It means that it is started from the spinal cord and wants to go to tectum. You are seeing this part. At first, you must know that it has a cross. It goes to another side and pass and go to the tectum or the superior colliculus. It doesn't relate. I told you the superior colliculus related to the vision. But this part, spinotectal, it doesn't completely related to the vision. Imagine that, for example, you are sitting at the dormitory or you are sitting at the library, and suddenly some person comes and put the hands on your shoulder. Suddenly you fear and you started to rotate the head, rotate the neck, and started. So it arises from one stimulation. So this part is related to spinotectal. If you're receiving the information by means of touching someone from your shoulder or from your back, maybe you see some person that, please don't touch me from the posterior part. I started to fear. If you're receiving the information, it's related to a spinotectal tract. And when you answer to this stimulation is tectospinal tract, which I will tell you in the next slides. So do you understand about the spinotectal? Okay, we continue. Spinotectal, I told you. The next part, spino-reticular. I told you in the reticular formation, you are seeing the black color. The information come to the spinal cord, it passes and terminate at the reticular formation in the brainstem. And after that, by means of connecting, it is involving in consciousness and also awareness. I told you before. The next one, spino-olivary tract. Spino-olivary. If you remember, I told you we have the inferior olivary nucleus, which is located at the medulla oblongata. Look at the blue color. The information comes to spinal cord and have a cross at the spinal cord. It comes to medulla oblongata. In the medulla oblongata, by means of inferior cerebellar peduncle, they are connecting to cerebellum. Okay, so it conveys or carries the information to cerebellum from proprioceptive organs. Okay, and also another main function is movement coordination and error-based motor learning. What does it mean? I'm here, I wrote it for you. Error-based motor learning in cerebellum. But if you remember, I told you before, the cerebral cortex is related to learning. What is the differences between new movement learning and error-based learning? What is the differences? What do you think about that? One of them is related to cerebral cortex and another one is related to cerebellum. The cerebellum, error-based, and the cerebral cortex is new learning. What is the differences? Tell me by means of, for example. I just said that the error-based is when you do an action and fix the mistake. So Sohrab, error-based is like by correcting a mistake. I said one of them is foot long-term information. I don't understand what you say, Isa, but the Sohrab as I and also I, yes, said true. Imagine that, for example, you started and you wanted to, for example, play ping pong, okay, or play tennis, okay, based on the, for example, instructions, you understand that, for example, you must getting the racket, okay, and also then, for example, playing the forehand and backhand, okay. But when you playing this, for example, sport, you understand that, for example, if you, for example, getting the racket in some angles, you can do better. Or, for example, you started to use bicycle, okay, you know about the pattern which is related to the cerebral cortex. But after that, for example, you ride the bike and then you fall in the street. But after one time and another time, you understand that to how to fix this problem. For example, uh, you ride the bike in true situation, in the true position, in the true pattern. So this part, error-based learning, is related to the cerebellum, and also the new motor learning is related to cerebral cortex. This was the definition for spino-olivary tract. And the next tract, and also I think the final ascending tract, is visceral sensory tract. It means that you are getting the information from visceral in the thorax and also in the abdomen. It's related, for example, pain in the stomach, stretching in the digestive system. Okay, they are coming. The information come to spinal cord and joining to spinothalamic tract. Do you remember this part? I told you we have lateral spinothalamic tract and also anterior spinothalamic tract. So the information came from the organs, from the viscera, and joining to spinothalamic tract, and then go to thalamus. Which part of thalamus? Same as before, VPL, nucleus of thalamus. By means of this part, we receive the information from the visceral organs. This slide is the summary of all of the things that I told you about the cross. For example, you are seeing, I wrote it for you, it's good for your exam. The lateral spinothalamic tract has a one cross in spinal cord. Anterior spinothalamic tract, one cross in spinal cord. Fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus conatus, one cross in medulla oblongata. Or I told you, posterior spinocerebellar tract without any cross. Or anterior spinocerebellar tract, one cross in spinal cord and another one in the cerebellum. I told you we have two cross in anterior spinocerebellar tract. Conocerebellar without crossing, spinotectal one cross in spinal cord, spinoreticular without cross, and spino-olivary, again, one cross in spinal cord and again another cross in cerebellum. I told you in the slides, and this was the summary. And you are seeing this slide. Look at here. We have two colors, blue colors and red colors. Okay. The blue colors are the ascending tract. For example, I told you we name this tract based on the location. For example, I told you we have anterior spinothalamic tract and also lateral spinothalamic tract. It means that one of them is located at the lateral side and another one is located at the anterior side. So this part is anterior spinothalamic and this part is lateral spinothalamic. This part is anterior spinocerebellar and immediately posterior. We called it posterior spinocerebellar. And also I told you fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus conatus. And between them we have posterior intermediate sulcus. This part and this part, gracilis and conatus. And these are the same in another side. These are the ascending tract. Sensory information which comes from the spinal cord, and goes to upper part. These tracts were the ascending tract. Do you have any questions about the ascending tract? If you have question, ask, and if you don't have question, we go to a descending tract. Okay, thank you. Okay. The descending tract. The descending tract are the same. We have again first order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron. If you understand the ascending tract, the descending tract are very easy for you. Look at here. We have lots of descending tract. We study one by one. The first part, corticospinal tract. It means that it is started from the cortex and it wants to go to spinal cord and then goes to, for example, outside. In the cerebrum, same as before, same as the cerebellum, we have several cells. Okay, if you remember, I told you in the cerebellum we have molecular layer, Purkinje layer, and granular layer. We have, for example, basket cell, granule cell, Golgi cell, and Purkinje cells. I told you in the cerebellum the important cells was Purkinje, and also I told you the axon of the Purkinje is the output of the cerebellum. Again, in the cerebrum or in the cerebral cortex, we have lots of cells. One of the main important cells are pyramidal cells. So the axon of the pyramidal cells making this part, corticospinal tract. Another name for this tract is pyramidal tract. Okay, if you remember, I told you in the anterior view of the medulla oblongata, we have something we called it pyramid. It is the location for decussation, for the cross the information which comes from the cerebral cortex and wants to go to spinal cord. I told you, and tell me, all of the tracts, all of the corticospinal tract must have cross or not? All of the descending tract which rises from the cerebral cortex must have cross, or maybe they don't have any cross. Hossein said that yes. Sohrab said no. Sohrab, tell me, which uh, which of the tracks doesn't have any cross? And another one, anyone who wants to say no? Zahra, Mustafa. Why you said no? What do you mean by anterior one? If you remember, tell me, tell me. After that, I will tell you the true answers. Okay, anterior corticospinal. What about the next part? Look at here. Remember, I told you, all of the descending tract, which is started from the cerebral cortex, must have cross. 80 to 85% of the tracts of the information has cross in medulla oblongata. Okay, in the pyramids. In the pyramids of medulla oblongata, they have cross. 80 to 85. And also 15 to 10 to 15% of the tract has cross in spinal cord. So it shows that all of the tracts, anterior corticospinal tract or lateral corticospinal tract, both of them or all of them must have cross. 80 to 85 have a cross in lateral corticospinal tract and also in the pyramids, and 10 to 50% has cross in spinal cord. So if I ask you the descending tract or the corticospinal tract doesn't have cross, all of them has cross, yes, you must say yes, they must have cross, but some of them has a cross in spinal cord and some of them has a cross in medulla oblongata. So Hossein Tarhini said true. I think Hossein said true. Mustafa, all of you said no. Yes, Hossein said true. So 80 to 85 in pyramids and 10 to 15 has cross in spinal cord. And it is related to rapid skilled movement. For example, playing an instrument. For example, writing something. Okay, these are related to humans. These are not related, for example, in animals. They just related to humans. Another one, reticulospinal tract. I told you the information comes from the spinal cord into the reticular formation, and the reticular formation, I told you about the three columns in the reticular formation, about this net. They sending the information into the spinal cord, and what is the function? Regulating the sympathetic and parasympathetic activity by means of the higher part, and also in some situation facilitate and in some situation inhibit the activity of motor neuron because they are starting from the reticular formation and they goes to spinal cord. This is reticulospinal. The next one, tectospinal. I told you about the example. Suddenly someone touch you, for example, in the dark, and you started to fear and you started to rotate the head and neck and sending the answers. This one is tectospinal in reverse to spinotectal. The next one is rubrospinal tract. The rubrospinal tract started from the red nucleus. The red nucleus was located at which part? No. Yes, Sohrab said true. It is located at the midbrain. The red nucleus was one of, yes, yeah, Razan, they are said true. The red nucleus is located at the midbrain. So this part, rubrospinal tract, it means that it is started from the red nucleus of the midbrain. They are getting the information from cerebral cortex and also getting the information from cerebellum, then sending the information into spinal cord. What is the function in the spinal cord? For example, imagine that In the upper limb, you want to start to flex the muscles. The information for flexing the or acting the flexor muscle is related to rubrospinal, and also inhibiting the activity of extensor muscles. Doing in your house, in your home, flexing your arm and extending the arm. Okay, by means of flexing the arm, it means that the rubrospinal tract sending the information and inhibiting the extensor muscle to your arm being flexed. The next one is vestibulospinal. The vestibular part, I told you before, it's located between the pons and medulla oblongata. It is started from the vestibular nucleus. They are getting the information from internal ear and cerebellum, and the function of the vestibulospinal is in reverse into the previous one, the rubrospinal. It means that the vestibulospinal facilitating the extensor muscle and inhibiting the flexor muscle. So the function of vestibulospinal and rubrospinal are in opposite. The next one is descending autonomic fibers. It means that it's taking part in sympathetic and parasympathetic part. They are starting from the higher centers of the central nervous system. For example, the hypothalamus. They have crossed in the brainstem, and it's terminate into which part? If you remember, I told you we have anterior horn and posterior horn in the spinal cord, but in some location, for example, T1 to L2 and S2 to S4, they are relating to sympathetic and parasympathetic. So the descending autonomic fibers, based on the situation, maybe in a stressful or maybe in the rest or peace positions, they goes to parasympathetic, S2 to S4, and T1 to L2 in the spinal cord. These are the summary of the things I told you. They have lots of the crosses in, for example, lateral corticospinal tract, anterior corticospinal tract, and these are the summary I told you before. And something which is, I told you before, we have three types: lateral lemniscus, medial lemniscus, and spinal lemniscus. I told you these are the tracts which comes together and working with each other. I told you the lateral lemniscus is related to the auditory tract. If you remember, the information by means of the ear comes to cochlear nucleus, then go to superior olivary complex here, maybe in the same side, or go to another side, and making this cross, we called it trapezoid body. Then by means of lateral lemniscus, they go to medial geniculate body of the thalamus, I told you. The next one here, medial lemniscus, the continuous part of internal arcuate fibers, which is related to gracilis and conatus. And the last one, spinal lemniscus. The spinal lemniscus is spinothalamic, maybe lateral spinothalamic and anterior spinothalamic tract, plus spinotectal tract. These three tracts coming together and walking and ascending as one lemniscus. We called it spinal lemniscus. They are passing from the brainstem to upper part, and you are seeing again the summary and the pictures about that ascending and descending tract. So we go to another sensory information. The first one is olfactory. Olfactory means related to smell. By means of your nose, you are smelling something. We have several receptors here that getting the information and carries the information into this part. I told you in the frontal part, we have something, we called it olfactory sulcus. In the olfactory sulcus, we have something, we called it olfactory bulb. They are getting the information, they are receiving the information and carrying the information. Here we have two stria. Look at here, I zoom it for you. We have medial stria and lateral stria. The medial stria of one side connecting to the medial stria of another side. And also we have the lateral stria. The lateral stereo connecting the information or sending the information into the related parts of the cortex. Which part of the cortex? Which part of the cortex? The amygdala and prepiriform areas here. These are the locations for processing the olfactory information. For example, I told you in the auditory system, the information goes to temporal parts, or about the vision, they are going to occipital parts of the brain. So the olfactory pathway goes to amygdala in the depth, I told you, in the depth of the uncus, we have the amygdala, and also we have the peripiriform areas. You can see again here, olfactory bulb, olfactory tract, stria, medial stria, lateral stria. The lateral stria carries in the olfactory information into related parts of cortex, amygdala and peripiriform area. This one is repeated optic tract. I told you, receiving the information from the retina. They have crossed, we call it optic chiasmata. The information go to thalamus, lateral geniculate body of the thalamus, and then by means of genicocalcarin or optic radiation, they go to occipital lobe. It is repeated. I told you before. You are seeing again the auditory pathway. I told you several times before in our theoretical class. These are repeated. You can see the slides. And then last one. This one is new. Gustatory pathway. The gustatory pathway related to getting the information from the tongue. Okay, it is related to the taste. We have anterior 2/3 of the tongue, posterior 1/3 of the tongue, and the most posterior part, which is related to the pharynx. The information started from the tongue and goes to one nucleus. If you remember, in the medulla oblongata, we have one nucleus, we called it solitarius. If you go and study the lessons which is related to the medulla oblongata, you can find that. Solitary nucleus. So the information from the tongue go to solitary nucleus. After that, they must be amplified. They must enhance. So they must go to thalamus. Which part of the thalamus? VPM nucleus of the thalamus. So you can see here this part, VPM nucleus of the thalamus. And after that, the information from VPM nucleus of the thalamus go to insula. I told you the hidden lobe, which is located at the depth of the sylvian sulcus or lateral sulcus. If you want to see the insula, you must remove the lateral sulcus and see the insula in the depth. And this one is the, again, from the gustatory information. They are coming from the tongue, come to solitarius, then comes to VPM nucleus of the thalamus, and then go to insula lobe, which is located here. And this was, and we finished our class. If you have question, you can ask, and if you don't have question, we can finish our class. You're welcome. You're welcome. We will have practical class in the next 2 weeks. I will tell you the Mustafa to divide you into several groups, and you will come to anatomical department, and we have the practical class. I will tell you in the practical class. You're welcome. You are very active in the online class, but you are not very active in usual classes. It was very good. No, we don't have attendance. Yes, Mustafa, you can see the persons and check at the, if you have the paper, check. And if you don't have, it's not important. Another person can see the movie if you record this class. Okay, thank you, Mustafa. Record the names. Thank you so much, guys. خسته نباشید in Persian. Goodbye.